Rural schools are the lifeblood of their communities in Oklahoma. Not only are they places where students go to school, but they're also central gathering places for community events and activities. And so, teachers who are working in rural schools and serving students oftentimes wear multiple hats in the school and in the community. So, I'm here with Mr. Zach Kinsey today. He is a history teacher at Warner High School. And we're going to talk a little bit about what he does in the classroom and what he does in the broader community here in Warner. So, Mr. Kinsey, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to chat about what you do.
I appreciate you taking the time to come here.
Yeah, well, great. Well, so let's take a dive right in then. So could you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I have been teaching at Warner. I believe this is my 15th year. It's my 23rd year overall in education. This is my fourth school district to teach at. I've been married for 19 years this May to my lovely wife, Jessica, and we have 4 children, Isaiah, Lydia, Grace, and Ruth. We're very active, of course, in the school system and as well at our church that we attend. So.
Amazing. Yeah. And so you've been here for 15 years, but 23 years in the profession. That's pretty incredible. So you're a veteran. You're probably coaching up a lot of newbies when they come.
Absolutely. Had the great opportunity to get to do that over the years, have new teachers come into the classroom. So,
do your kids go to this school district as well, or do you send them elsewhere?
Actually, we're homeschooling them right now. My wife is actually taught at Warner years ago, and so she was homeschooled, and she wanted to have the opportunity to do that in the beginning. So that's what we're doing right now.
So I bet they get a pretty good education from you and your wife.
Absolutely. Yeah, they don't get snow days, so to speak.
Okay. All right. Well, great. Well, maybe take us back a little bit. What brought you into the profession? I mean, why teach? I mean, you probably had many opportunities that you could have pursued. You chose to be a teacher. Why?
Absolutely. When I first started college, I actually was a journalism major and had changed my mind into education. I had really great teachers growing up, and the tug at my heart to emulate them, to be like them, because they made such an impact in my life. My high school basketball coach, my uncle was actually my U.S. history teacher, and did some coaching. He was the principal at the school, and so I had some of those influences of those people, how they gave back to our community. You know, I grew up in a very rural community itself, very small population, and a lot of poverty. And I got to see how teachers poured into the students, changed their lives just from an education. And I wanted to be a part of that. So my love of sports, I wanted to be a coach when I first started, which I did that for a few years, and joined, the history teaching realm, and it's been great.
Yeah. So are you kind of active in the community beyond just the school then? Or are you still coaching? Are you involved?
Well, over the years, I decided not to coach. It's a busy lifestyle, and you're not home very much. And I had a desire to be home a little bit more than your typical coach would be.
You got 4 children.
Yeah, I have 4 children now, and so that influenced that absolutely. I had a great time coaching. The difference you can make outside of the classroom, is awesome as well. And I have very memorable moments of having those opportunities at sporting events, to make a believer in a kid who may be doubting themselves or something along those lines. My wife and I also work with the teenagers at our church, so we're very active in ministry there and running a van route and doing other things. So.
Yeah, that's great. So you're a high school teacher, which means you see lots of kids graduate high school. Maybe they go off and do other things post-secondary. Maybe they go to university. Maybe they head into the workforce. But do they come back? I mean, what do you kind of see with the students that leave Warner?
We've had students. I mean, they can cross the country. I know that our principal recently sent an email of a student that's in Alaska, is a dog sledder now, actually. Wow. And as a teacher, you've never pictured your students going to head off to do that, but many heading off to college. I know you talked with Superintendent Vincent about that. We've actually had some teachers or students return back as teachers in our school system.
Really?
And wanted to be a part. They saw what I saw, similar to change, in kids' lives. And that's the thing that, really drew me into being involved with the school, wanting to be a teacher. It wasn't just a paycheck. I couldn't imagine just having a job where it was just about earning some cash, and at the end of the day, I was so wrapped up in that. I want to know at the end of my life, as I draw my last breath, that my legacy will live on in generations to come. And that was something that was so powerful about education. I got to see that in my uncle's life as principal in our small community. So
Education is kind of in the family.
yeah,
Yeah.
such a blessing. And over the years as being a teacher, I've had lots of opportunities to impact kids' lives, and that's just very rewarding.
What do you see? I mean, do you ever get to see them in the community? Do they come back to school?
Well, here and there, occasionally you'll run into a student at shopping out in public, and hey, there's my history teacher. They may be with their kids, and they'll run over and shake your hand and tell their kid a story about what they remember from class. I've had students say, I'm in my college class now, and I wouldn't survive if it wasn't for some of the lessons that you provided, in class. I've had students, I also teach 8th grade here, 8th grade in the middle school and 10th grade smaller school district, and see the growth from, just from 8th grade to 10th grade, where a student will be in tears in 8th grade, standing up in front of the class to give a performance, and you're having to coax them to do that. And in 10th grade, they walk in here with their shoulders back and confident, still a little nervousness, but they didn't think twice of doing it. I have had, some other stories over the years that was very memorable. I had a young lady that had actually got a hold of my wife through social media, had left, I guess, before the school year even ended, abruptly. And I had wrote a little note, to encourage them as I knew that they were leaving that day. And little did I know, 5 or 6 years later, through social media, my wife received a message from this student that wanted to reach out to me and say thank you for just that little note. She said that she had been going through a real struggle at that moment and that took her away from our community. And she actually had confessed that she was contemplating suicide. And that grips you. You never know who's walking into your classroom, what's going on in their life. And she wanted to thank me for that little note. She said that was a morale booster in that moment. And she's actually studying in psychology. She wants to be a counselor. And she wanted to reach out and attribute, some of that, getting through that situation in life to that little note. And so how can you not want to be an educator when you get a message like that?
Yeah.
Now you don't get those every day. One of my former principals actually instructed us to have a file in our desk where when you do get those positive comments, that you put them in that file and draw upon them on the tough days. You have those that you're wondering what's going on that day and it's rough, but I refer back to that, and so it's been a blessing in my life.
Yeah. What would you say about the tough days? So, there's obviously some great aspects of teaching,
Mm-hmm.
and it sounds like you have a number of different stories that
Oh, yeah.
demonstrate the incredible impact that you're making on young people's lives. But what are some of the challenges?
Well, as an idealistic new teacher, when you walk into the classroom, you're wanting to save the world. That's how I approached it, that every kid was going to go out as a bright and shining star into the world, almost. And, not every student comes from the same background. And so when you have a student in the class, you're moving them ahead. And some of them are at different starting spots when they walk in. And so that may be hard to measure on a state test or something of that. But to see their growth, on those tough days, I have to remind myself that it may not be the finish line that I have, for this student is the same as everyone. But did I push them forward? That's what I have to go back and reflect on.
Yeah. Did you get them to where they're going? And each
Yeah,
of those paths
yeah.
may look a little different than what we imagine when we start with them.
Absolutely. They may not be heading off to be a graduate at TU, but then again, by the time they enter their trade or whatever it may be pulling in double, what some of the other students might be making as a paycheck. So that may be their end goal.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to be realistic about what education's purpose, is.
So Warner's a little bit of a smaller rural community. The high school is, I don't know how many students do you have in the high school here?
It may be in the neighborhood of 500. I may be guessing on that.
Okay. So is it most of the students know each other, know each other's families? Does it create
Absolutely.
more of a tight-knit community as a result? Does everyone know who you are when you're
Oh,
around?
absolutely. When you have a parent-teacher conference at the beginning of the year, it's not like they've never met you before. It's just getting to know you, an individual. Maybe they haven't had a personal conversation with you. But absolutely, that's one of the blessings. I've taught in a larger school district, a 5A, and I wanted to come into a smaller community because I got to see the impact that the teachers had on myself in that situation, knowing family members, knowing people, and you may have all of the siblings in a family before it's all said and done, and that helps you, have that kind of connection with your students to know what they're capable of and what parents' expectations are.
So you wanted to be in a smaller environment because of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And education offers you that opportunity. You can go to larger districts if that's what, your cup of tea, or a smaller one. For myself, I've been in 4 different districts, and there were different reasons for the moves. My wife was finishing college, and so we moved towards Bartlesville and taught in that region. But education offers you that opportunity that no matter where your residence is in Oklahoma, there's going to be a school nearby, and different classroom experiences. I've taught in a math classroom. I've taught science. I tested out, the OSET test offer you that opportunity. So my degree's in history, but you're not just stuck in one mold.
Right.
Education can reinvent itself every year. If a teacher was to have burnout, they could switch into a different subject and go pursuing that for some time. So
Right. And it sounds like you've done that.
yeah, actually I have. I coached for some time, and then I moved on to a different school district, and I was the middle school and high school's math teacher there for some time, and then bounced on. I've had experiences from 5th grade or 6th grade up to high school, and kind of got to settle in what I thought I enjoyed the most, which is what I'm currently doing right now.
Yeah. So when you think about teaching in a rural school in Oklahoma and a young person who may be considering teaching and maybe teaching in a rural school, what do they need to think about? I mean, what would be the things that you would want them to consider before pursuing that track, or if they want to pursue that track, what should they have in mind?
In more of a rural setting, well, you are going to have repeat families. So what you need to consider is your interaction with that child may be negative in some instance, but you need to keep it positive for as best as you can, because that is going to live on for years, or maybe other cousins or whatever. That may be something to consider. Being able to
So there's
work.
a good and bad side.
There's a good, bad,
good and bad,
to
right?
that.
Yeah.
I think it's a blessing to get to be a part of that. And in terms of your coworkers, you may be with coworkers, your entire career. In a small community, there may not be a lot of turnover, and so you've got to develop positive relationships between coworkers there. To me, the rural setting, I wouldn't want, and it wasn't that I had a bad experience at a larger district, but it didn't feel like home. And you walk downtown into a local business and you can interact with people every trip there who you have their student in class, or they have had some interaction. So
Right.
you definitely have to, consider every interaction you have, will be remembered for a time. So
What are your relationships like with your colleagues, fellow educators, the superintendent, the principals? How does that? what does that
absolutely.
look like?
In a larger district, I got to see my building principal, but I don't know that I ever encountered maybe a superintendent, walking into the building. Here, Mr. Vinson, you may see him every other day walk through the building. The principals are going to be in the hallways, walking up and down, poking their head in your classroom. There's a lot of interaction between all the staff members. And we have weekly teachers meetings, district-wide. You may interact with the elementary building just down the way. So that has been a great blessing to me. You may see them at other events in town. Our school makes it a point to try to interact with the community very well. We have a Christmas celebration where it's kind of like carnival atmosphere where they can come up and play games, and it's a free event. We fundraise. We have a student leadership team that actually does fundraisers to provide for that. And local churches and other businesses will donate money towards that to give back to the community. So you really feel like, you're a part of the community in a smaller district.
Yeah, that's incredible. What would you say, when thinking about teaching in a rural school, What would you say are some misconceptions about that role that maybe people have out there? Things they don't actually understand about what it's truly like.
Well, I think they may think that there's not a lot of opportunities, maybe at growth or something that, maybe, that a larger district may offer. There are many different hats that need to be filled, as you mentioned earlier, and there are extracurricular activities that you can be a part of. I've already mentioned coaching. There are, our 4-H club, there's FFA, there's other parts that you can help and be a part of that. I drive a school bus here in the district, so I get to interact, that's in a different way, but I get to be that first person that they see, a school district employee, as they get on the bus, in the morning or the last one at night. And so I get to have different interactions that way in a rural setting that you might not, in a larger district. But I think it's all positive, because if you're trying to leave a lasting legacy, every interaction counts. And in a small community, you're making them constantly.
It's a big responsibility.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Also, I was speaking of advancement, the OTEP program, I talked with you about that earlier, the Oklahoma Teacher Empowerment Program. That's been an opportunity here, even in a rural district, that we've latched onto. Superintendent Minson has, from the beginning of that program, offered some of us teachers, and I've been blessed to be a part of that. I know the legislature and our administration has opened that door, and my professional growth of the last 3 years has been tremendous. I would have been very frightened to have done one of these kind of interviews in the past, but getting those opportunities to go to different, training sessions and to actually lead faculty staff development, in times, and develop what we were going to talk about. And plus the compensation, the additional compensation, has been a great blessing. And so I encourage the legislature in the future, more innovative programs like that. But in a rural district, you can still, make a living and even advance yourself.
In a rural school, you have opportunities to wear different hats, as you noted. So you may gain experience in lots of other domains, whereas in a bigger school, you might not have that opportunity.
Absolutely. If someone was considering being an administrator, a rural district would be a great place to be able to wear those many different hats and to see what it's like. I teach driver's ed during the summer. I drive one of the school buses, and those are things at the beginning of my career I wanted my spare time of the summer breaks. I enjoyed all of those holidays throughout the year, but education offered me the opportunity, being in the education realm, that if I want increased income, there are opportunities for that, to wear different hats in a rural school district, where in a larger one, I may have not been allowed to do that or had those opportunities. And so the OTEP program, as well as that, has allowed me to do that over the years. I mean, I've probably taught, 5 or 6 different types of classes, being in a smaller district, that I may have not, had that opportunity in a larger one.
Yeah, that's really neat. So tell me a little bit more about the academics here at Warner, because the district now has a pretty good track record across the state, regularly an A-rated school. Students who attend this district have some of the highest ACT scores in the state. So it's really impressive academically what Warner has done. What do you attribute? What's the difference here?
Well, we could go on for a long time. I would have to go on a short list.
We need another interview for that.
Yeah, we have a short list. But, in terms of the rural community aspect of that, you get to know your students very well. We don't have very large class sizes, right, in a smaller district. And so you get that opportunity, and also in extracurricular activities to see what they're doing or interact with students. So they genuinely believe you care. And you genuinely do need to care to enter into the profession. I would say you need to have that type of servant's heart. But the opportunities that are in that smaller realm here at Warner, it's been amazing. The administration's laid forth a pathway that they wanted us to walk, and it wasn't flashy. It wasn't like we were having to reinvent the wheel. It was doing old school education, but doing it well. Making sure you use the entire class period, bell to bell teaching. Don't waste time. If you waste 5 minutes at the end of class or 5 at the beginning, and you add that up over 160 or 70 days, you've wasted weeks of school. So making sure you utilize what's available there. If a student needs remediation, if there's something that they're struggling with, then we need to hook them up with tutors, or maybe take a little bit of their lunchtime to tutor. And teachers are willing to give that up here, their own lunch periods to help students, with maybe a situation or a problem they're having with learning a topic. The AR program, or accelerated reader, require students, when you walk in the classroom, you have to have your library book with you. And when there may be quote unquote downtime, if one student finishes what they're learning before the other, then they need to read their AR book. And we require certain number of AR points at the end of a certain number of weeks. And so without that, you're ineligible to participate in extracurricular activities. And so there are high standards that are set forth. But, since I've been in this district, which was 2 years before the previous, or the administration we have now, 2 years before that, our student body growth is over 100 new kids, or I'm sure 150, because surrounding communities are trying to get their kids into our school district because they want to be a part of this success.
That's exciting.
And it is very exciting. And to see new faces that I may have not had in 8th grade, but I do now in 10th grade. And you ask them their story and they tell you, well, we wanted to be a part of this. And that's awesome.
Yeah.
You want to get up and go to work, and you want to shine. And that's what we've been able to do here. But it's just been hard work, elbow, grease kind of work, nothing flashy. But
Well, you kind of talked about your family life and your life outside of school a little bit, but what is, for people who are considering the profession, what is your life like outside
absolutely
the school walls?
Well, I'll tell you, when I first wanted to be an educator, that was very appealing to me, to know that I was going to have the summer break, that it was there. And if I needed extra income, I could always pursue a job. Like currently, I teach driver's ed in the summer. I have weekends off. And so I'm able to go to kids' events or maybe church events and be a part of that. There's some concession duties and some, conferences you go to here and there. But it offers somebody flexibility. When I think of education, they have the flexibility that if they want to pursue that higher income, there are job opportunities in education to do that. Administration, OTEP, and other things like driving the bus or so forth. But if they don't, there's flexibility to have a lot of extra time. And I know there's a lot of controversy over, pay and that sort of thing, but there are a lot of breaks that you also take off from working day-to-day life. So, I see that compensation. When I went into this, I saw that as a fair amount. So.
Right. So maybe people on the outside, they might overestimate exactly how much time teachers have off, because it sounds like you work in the summer, but there's also some significant time too, it sounds like you're saying.
And you can also attend conferences during the summer to increase your knowledge base. I talked about some of the items up in my classroom I've retrieved from going on different vacations to spots that were particularly history. And my wife may frown upon some of those, where we might be visiting a historical museum where she may have wanted to go to another location. It offered me a story that I could go back and share for 12, 15, 20 years, after that event. So I think it's a great balance, between work. If I want to pour in more and make a lesson, extra special, I have the ability to do that. But I also have the ability to live and be interactive in other things outside.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Kinsey, I know we're still in the middle of the school day here, so I'm going to let you get going. But thank you so much for your time and being willing to share your perspective on the teaching profession and all the work that you do. Really, really appreciate your work. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.